Ok.
Se aparecer. Eu acho que vai ter que pegar outra cadeira.
All right, so shall we begin? So it is my great pleasure to launch a series of workshops on the Cultural Heritage Across Borders program, developed in partnership between Digital Humanities Department at King's College London and the Historical Museum of Londrina, which is attached to the State University of Londrina, Brazil, and the citizen supporters from the Assam Association of Museum Friends. This program is funded by King's Global Engagement Scheme 2021. The major aspiration of this partnership is to explore and forge the sustainable and scalable modes and practices of remote collaboration with global and local cultural heritage institutions for education and research. On the educational side, more specifically, our program is concerned with developing intercultural competences of our research staff and students, and aims at decolonizing the King's curriculum by engaging our global partners in disseminating their case studies and work practices. This series consists of 5 workshops. The first 3 will be delivered by the team of students who divide their time between their studies in the areas of history and working as interns at the Historical Museum of Londrina. The other 2 workshops to follow will be delivered by my colleague Dr. Kristen Schuster, lecturer in digital curation, and myself on the last session. The workshops will take you through the practices of handling and digitizing historical images, to museum data curation, and finally the application of immersive technologies in creating the added value for public engagement. Before I pass it on to our tutors from Londrina, just a quick note on the housekeeping rules. As it was explained in the invitation that the participants received prior to this event, we will be recording the sessions and publish them on King's YouTube channel. Those of you who express their wish to remain less publicly exposed, please keep your videos turned off throughout the entire event. I hope you will enjoy learning and sharing your experiences with us. And now I'd like to give the digital floor to Edméia Ribeiro, professor at the State University of Londrina and director of the Historical Museum of Londrina in Brazil. Now I will stop sharing, and the floor is yours, Edméia.
Good afternoon and good night, everyone. I am Edméia, professor of History at the State University of Londrina in the state of Paraná and director of the Historical Museum of Londrina. Forgive me for the pronunciation, it sucks. It's a great joy for us, and we feel honored to be part of Global Engagement project. I want to congratulate Professor Gabriel and Professor Kristen for their welcome to partnership and thank them for their generosity and patience, especially with me who do not master the English language. I also want to thank Livia, who made this meeting of ideas and experience possible. Today, the first day of the workshop, I welcome the students who will participate in these meetings, and I hope they will be days of learning as pleasure. Learning is pleasurable because will be taught and undergraduate and graduate students and human sciences for the State University of Londrina and the State University of São Paulo. Are they Guilherme Tavares Balau, Luiz Gustavo Cavalheiro, Marina Gali, Mariana Silva Barbosa Zamprona, Rúbia Fernandes. So make a good trip. Eu passo a palavra agora.
Thank you, Edméia. Thank you very much for the welcoming words. And now I would like to pass it on our tutor of today, which is Guilherme. Hi, Guilherme.
Hello. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I hope you will all enjoy this session. In this part, I will be introducing you all to a fundamental part of the whole structure of the workshop that is a more theoretical approximation to how do we deal in our daily dealings with information and narratives and historiographical questions such as framing, reflections, and how does that all relate to our experiences on the museum. I will present here my first slide. I will take my mask off so it can be easier for you to hear. I already have received my vaccination shots, so that's not too much of a problem. So, before I start with everything, I first would like to have a little chat with everyone. I hope nobody's troubled by that. I like to speak to people and relate and communicate experiences in order to make greater our capability of learning and sharing all of that. So, first of all, my name is Guilherme, as everyone has said. I am a graduation student at State University of Londrina, and I'm an intern here at the museum. I have started my internship from 2017. I am here for almost 5 years now, 4 years, and it has been a really awesome experience for me. The museum has made possible so many connections, including this one for me. The fact that I speak English and I also speak a little bit of German, it has related me with a lot of people from all around the world, and you are one of them right now. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here. So the first thing I would like to ask all of you, I would like some of you who are able to, who don't mind speaking to me on this recorded meeting, about a little bit of your experiences in museological institutions. I would like to know, for example, what do you think when you visit a museum? What do you expect from a museum? What kind of museums do you like, are common for you to participate in? Anyone would care to initiate?
Yep, who will be the bravest to kick off and share the experiences?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Zilt, yes.
Cool.
Please go ahead.
So hello everyone. So my name is Isolt and I'm a student at King's. I'm doing digital culture and society. And what I like for me a good exhibition in a museum is an exhibition which for me is kind of immersive in a way that I can feel I don't know, I can experience the context, like the artifact and the way it's curated, and also the configuration of the room is kind of speaking to me in a way. And so, yes, I think that's it for me for now. Thank you.
That's awesome. And do you like different kinds of museums? Do you prefer historical museums, arts museums, or natural history museums, perhaps?
So I'm a big fan of contemporary museum. I've been working in art, in contemporary art. So I have my favorite ones. I really like the Palais Tokyo of Paris because I think the way they are handling this kind of immersiveness very well. And I also I'm also enjoying different museums in London as well, such as Tate. Modern Britain as well. I mean, but I also like other kind of museum. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else would like to share their experiences?
Yeah, sure, I can go. So hi everyone, I'm Gigi. So my experience about museums, basically it starts from last semester because I took a optional module about museums, and I got quite interested in the relationship between power and museums. It's basically talking about like some museums, they would display exhibitions to like colonialization, like for example the British Museum. And as for art museums, I've always wanted to go to the Museum of Modern Art. I guess as long as we're not in lockdown anymore, probably someday I can go visit. Yeah, that's it.
That's awesome. I think you will really like this presentation here then, because the way I see museums is as places of power. That's something really important. I take some theoretical approximations from Jorn Huysen, the German historian, but also from some Brazilian museological thinkers, such as Ulpiano Menezes. I don't think there are translations, so I unfortunately can't recommend you some of those. But I think you will enjoy this quite a lot, and thank you for your sharing.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We have quite some time available, so that's not a problem.
Hello. Hi, this
Hello.
is Chiara. So hi, I'm Chiara. I'm in the MA program of Arts and Cultural Management, and I'm really interested in art museums. But I think what really catches my attention is mostly the interaction that museums have with communities. I mean, with the communities where they are located, which I guess also kind of like plays a role with what you were saying before. So with like the soft power and so, because I think museums are a really good, like a sort of tool, I guess, for communities, which can be really powerful if they actually make a connection, if they actually manage to link with its own community. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe something comes to my head. For example, Tate Museum in like here in London has these sort of programs that they try to connect with the communities around. Also, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the one that is in East London, that is going to open soon, also is taking into consideration a lot in the community, so like the East London community where they're located, and they're always trying to make them participate in every single step of the museum construction of like the exhibitions, and so like they're always interested in their opinions, and I think that's really important.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think it's really important when museums have a sort of post-colonial approximation towards exhibitions nowadays, right? I know that Europe, in many museums, there is not only museums, but also cultural institutions have this strong approximation with social minorities that is becoming a lot more common and a lot more important, in the sense that they are being evaluated as real pieces of the process of communication. In Brazil, we have a similar relation with the indigenous people. Many museums tend not to include, historical museums, tend not to include the narratives from local indigenous people in their exhibitions, communications, because it is, as one thing that I will present, a framing of history, right? So they kind of see the history of the city, of the location, of the regional aspect as a kind of genetic history, as in a narrative that follow a telos, a ending, right? So that's really awesome. Thank you for sharing. And we are open for another one, someone else who might want to talk some more. Anyone else?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Hello everyone. My name is Grace, or you can call me Xiaoxing. I want to say a little because I really enjoy historical museum, and I once took an optional module called immersive media and extended reality. So I really looking forward kind of VR technology or mixed R that combining the cultural heritage with those kind of new technology. And I really enjoy listening to lots of interesting stories that give me a sense of connection of past, present, and future, because I can get the stories and maybe the collective memory or cultural memory of one community or a location, something like that. So I really hope to enjoy the workshop. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think that in Brazil, the approximation that digital humanities offer is still like really at a starting point still. Some kind of discussions that go around the world tend to arrive a little bit later in Brazil and some third world countries such as Brazil. But this integration with the digital world and the material world that carries all this relation is a really nice touch, like to think about when you deal with museums and everything. Thanks for your sharing. We have time for someone else if anyone is interested. I adore listening to experiences and everything. So anyone else wants to speak?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm Ellen. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I work quite a lot in digital engagement, but it's quite interesting because I think I come at it from a slightly different angle. I do love how museums allow their local community to engage. But I think I've looked a lot at regional museums who work with their local community. And I think digital engagement allows people to talk to and experience kind of aspects from communities that they wouldn't normally encounter. And I think that's quite an unusual way to look at online engagement. And I think that that's quite something that's quite exciting over the course of lockdown.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you're completely right. The digital sphere, it allows for a greater reach, right? Especially, I think that has been uh, almost exaggerated on the pandemic time, because how does the museum reach someone that can't go to it? So our own experience, for example, we have had to reinvent many of the ways that the museum appears to the public, and like through social networks, through projects and everything, including this workshop. Why not? So that's awesome. Thank you a lot. Anyone else want to speak? If not, I think I can begin with a little video that I have presented, that I prepared. I will show you around the museum. I will speak a little bit about some parts of it. How does the museum relates to the cultural heritage of the city and the local history and everything. I will speak a little bit about the long-term exhibition and the place as a whole. So first of all, I'd like to say sorry about my pronunciation on the video, especially when I'm recording something. I have a little bit of trouble with pronunciation and everything. So I hope you can all understand it as best as possible. So if you want anyone after I exhibit the video has any doubts or anything, I can answer to all of them, no problem at all. I will put it up for us here. Can you see the video? It's paused right now, but is it showing up?
No, at the moment, Guilherme, we can see the people on the main room, the icons, but not the video. Yeah, now the video is back. Great.
The museum, as a place of memory itself, holds a symbolic image that associates it with the city's history by definition. As a kind of meta-phenomenon, the building that serves as enclosure to the pulp of the institution is itself an important piece of history and memory. Up until 1982, it was used as a main railway station for the region, with many trains coming to and from, be it with coffee commerce's beans, or with passengers from the major regions, from São Paulo to Santa Catarina, the two states that surround Paraná. It is not unusual to receive visitors that have experienced this phenomena at the museum, and it is more often than not packed with a lot of emotion and nostalgia, not to mention the joyful tears. Many people have been involved in this historical experience and see through the lens of the building as a symbolical catalyst, a window towards their past. They are inhabitants of Londrina and relate to the city's past in numerous ways. There are people who had their parents working at the station, those who work themselves, and those that simply have already traveled by train through those very same steps that cover the boarding platform. Through this presence of the past, the visitors can experience a sensorial approximation of that institution's object, a representation of that which is inaccessible, that is, the past in itself. Through a historical representation, aspects of the historical experience of the multiple lives that relate to the city in a direct or indirect way are proposed to reflect upon the vast purposes of a historical theory. The building that houses that institution was constructed from 1947 to 1951, the year of its inauguration. Before that, the railway station, that was up until then the only one in the city, had become too small for the daily dealings of people and commerce. To represent a gateway into the city that was considered a world capital of coffee, it had to be exceptional. The architecture is a mixture and juxtaposition of ideas from the eclecticist movement, representing many cultures in its composition. Every one of those a homage to the different nationalities that compose the immigrants that bought plots of land from the company that basically built the city, Companhia de Terras Norte do Paraná, or Land Company North of Paraná, which has come from the United Kingdom. The city at the end of the 1920s to the beginning of the 1930s is full of representations from European and North American building styles, and the museum represents the multitude of different colors and backgrounds. Since those times, it is possible to say that Londrina has been a stage for a syncretistic experience, and it remains with that aspect inlaid in its edifice. The ironwork doors remind of the modernist movement, which was fundamental for the development of Brazil's cultural accumulation or the artistic field. The long arching entryways, the triangle-shaped roof, and the stone foundation all resemble European characteristics, born from the climatic necessities of that continent. In Londrina, they serve the purpose of resembling the heritage from those that came with economic interest. Not only the building, but also the garden plays a part in this experience. On one side of the lot, there are plants and trees that come originally from Japan, Canada, the United States, Morocco, and more. On the other side, facing one of the city's main highways, there are flora that originate in Brazil, such as the peroba and the candelabra tree, a symbol for the state's natural heritage. In those areas, the visitors can get in touch with aspects that are representative of that rich cultural assimilation, based upon the relation with different nationalities and worldviews. When children visit the museum, they can walk through corridors of coffee plants and pick berries from those for themselves. maintaining a personal memory of that place, which comes through natural means. Every year, there is an event that celebrates museums around the country, and visitors are able to participate in reenactments of production processes for the harvest of coffee beans, such as the separation that must be done right after the picking of the beans. By the façade that fronts the busy Dom Geraldo Fernandes Highway, also called the East-West, there is a train parked in the few rails that are left downtown. A piece from the National Railway history, the train remounts to 1910, being older than the city itself. Although it has been through a very thorough restoration, the exact color scheme and fundamental structure remains from that same time period. Time had not been kind to its materials, and the restoration has rescued it from being destroyed by rust and termites. Inside, visitors are able to experience the claustrophobic sensation of living in one of its wagons that house the railways company's worker. The class separation between first and economic class and the relation between cargo and travelers in several kinds of trips is made. Carefully taken care of, the railway train built by Baldwin Corporation more than a century ago is one of the most striking features of this institution, serving as an important aspect for the city's cultural heritage. There are many other aspects present at the museums outside, which are, in itself, a whole experience of historical representation. Through a personal visit, people can be approximated to this presence of historical symbolism and nostalgia in a multitude of different ways. The inside of the museum brings forth a plethora of sensorial aspects that relate to the experience of a place of history and memory. Being the museum itself a historical location, it maintains the structure as a privilege to separate its different exhibitions to the public. The first room presented to visitors has a box office that was used for the railway tickets purchase, and it is the only place in the whole building that has kept its original flooring, along with the ticket stamper and administrative signs. By the wall facing the west side of the room, the first element introduced in visitations is the set of historical watches that were used in the state's railways up until the closure, which is used to relate objects in a historical exhibition, setting apart from those in daily, normal routines. By separating the function of a historical object in an exhibition space from a daily contemporaneous object, those visitors, which are most of the times composed of children from local schools, are able to take a moment and reflect upon the historicity of the experience of every historical time, but also to remind themselves that these objects have a sense attributed to them, and then that it is their responsibility on a public museum to participate in the process of maintaining the conditions in which they are currently are. On the east side of the room hangs a radio tree-log with which the visitors are presented an important historical element of the city that normally goes by without thought, its flora, being a significant aspect of the city's commercial dealings, but also representing a unique kind of nature that belongs to the region of Paraná, with its own kinds of plants and trees, such as those presented by the garden previously mentioned. The west-sided entrance houses one of the most frequented places in the institution, that is the long-term exhibition. In here, there is too much to be discussed in a single video, but for now, we shall focus on the more direct and practical aspects of its representation of the past. Many local schools bring their students along with teachers to complement the daily teachings when children are being presented to local history. In here, they can relate, through sensorial stimuli, phenomena that have often been overlooked by structural studies of this past. Several topics are placed in question through 4 different sets of room. On the first one, there are representations of the indigenous people that have inhabited this land before the construction of the city back in 1929. Their cultural signs, religious worldviews, and archaeological findings can be seen represented in this first room. That is an important approximation given that the city's pioneers have excluded the natives in traditional narratives of history, and it is a social duty of the museum to break down this framing of the past that makes up a monument of exclusion and segregation. Through collaboration with the local Kaingang tribe, the museum is able to present a re-evaluation of the presence of indigenous people as it was constant in the formation of Londrina. Besides that, there are many pictures to elucubrate the beginnings of the city itself, back in 1929. The west-sided entrance houses one of the most frequented places in the institution, that is the long-term exhibition. In here, there is too much to be discussed in a single video, but for now, we shall focus on the more direct and practical aspects of its representation of the past. Through sensory and not the first findings can be seen the beauty of the museum. Museum is able to present a re-evaluation of the presence of indigenous people as it was constant in the formation of Londrina. The following room presents the rudimentary progress experienced on the 1930s, such as the early use of photography as an element of propaganda, the first commercial enterprises, and the housing conditions for the pioneers, which reflect material conditions in those first years. Besides the immigrants' presence in the construction of the city, material and cultural elements that came with migrants from other parts of the nation and from the indigenous peoples themselves are represented in those times in order to make up the cultural heritage that composed Londrina's identity as a whole. The third room, also commonly called the Room of Immigration and Labor, holds a collection of material objects that show different services that were performed by its inhabitants, such as photography, with historical photographical devices and different techniques used to measure sunlight through analogical means, healthcare services, which were, for some time, mostly reserved to those associated with the company that built the city, especially in the treatment of illnesses that thrived on the bad sanitary conditions of those first years, construction work that still resembles common tools used in contemporaneous constructions, and many more. It also has elements of the different cultures brought together through the process of immigration. The company estimates around 33 different nationalities that compose the city's population back then. Of those 33, there were many that came from Eastern countries, such as the Czech Republic, Japan, but also from European countries, such as Germany and Italy. The last room concludes the visitation to this side and exhibits, on one end, different sort of islands that comprise elements of cultural life, religion, music, children's toys, and the educational system. The final presentation tells the history of the commerce of coffee in Londrina. Having been one of the world's capital of coffee at some points, Londrina has many cultural aspects that remember this legacy that is more often than not framed in its cultural institutions. The city's main shopping mall has a coffee branch in its logo and is named after a local coffee species. The university-associated theater is named Green Gold or Ouro Verde in allusion to the richness brought by that commerce, and many other sites allude to this glorious past the city has created and monumentalized in its local historical identity. In all of its representations of the past, the museum's exhibition as a whole allows the visitors to take part in a fundamental aspect of historical education, the sensibilization of critical viewpoints. It is primed to use the space offered to educate viewers in the sense that they must reflect upon different narratives and discourses in societal living as a means towards potentializing a democratic living in contemporaneous political life. The museum, by no means, presents a perfect outline of history as a whole, but it presents a great opportunity to exercise means of reading the fine prints of narratives in a sense that works from the point of view of those subjected to the dealings of the ruling classes. In this sense, the museum, as an institution of history and memory, is also an institution of reflection upon society, in the sense that it proposes re-readings of the monuments engraved in symbolical discourses and assertions of fundamental truths. It proposes reflection of in and outside narratives.
Guilherme, you have to
Yeah.
switch on.
I've seen it now. So I hope it was clear for everyone that you could follow up with the talking and everything. So that's basically the museum. It's a really pretty place, I think so. And I hope everyone could understand what I was proposing in the video. Either way, we will have some free time by the end of this meeting, so we can talk, we can discuss, and perhaps share experiences towards this theoretical approximation. So now I will start a reading part that I believe might take around 20, 25 minutes. I want to ask all of you, do you want to make a little break right now? Like 5 minutes just to get some water, and then we can resume? Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so 5 minutes, all right? And I will be back shortly as well.
Okay, sure.
I'm back. Now I will initiate my presentation to you. So this is the historical theory on museums, narratives, framing, and reflection. Through this workshop, I aim to offer you all a glimpse of these institutions' interns' daily practices from the point of view of our theoretical conceptions and showing how a praxis is executed while based upon this theory of history. First of all, I want to introduce you to the body of the workshop. This, the first day, we will have a theoretical approach to the daily dealings, which will be made by me. And the second day, we will be presenting you the theoretical approach between history and memory from Luis and museological communication by the Museum of Londrina, which is by Marina. On the third day, we will have our more practical day that will be practical sanitation of photographies and means of dissemination. So on the workshop structure, I have proposed you to acquire some objects like the brush with some fine bristles, an air sprayer, a sheet of white cardboard, and a plastic white eraser. You will need those for the third day when we will make some sanitations in photography, and you will be joining us in that experience. It's not like obligatory, you don't have to do it, but if you want to keep up with the video and everything, it will be on the third day. So, this presentation, what I aim to present to you. I aim to demonstrate the theoretical conceptions that formulate the daily practices at Londrina's Historical Museum. And how does a praxis based on this theoretical approach occur when facing photographic collections? An exposition of the background that permeates the approach to photographic collections, and the treatment of narratives as a means of constructing a past and a history. For such, the object through which we will demonstrate this experience will be historical narratives about the city's past from the starting point of the museum's photographic collections, made up of donations from people that contributed to the construction of a local cultural heritage, composing the institution's collection as a whole. From the starting point of a theoretical foundation that situates the place of the museum society, I aim to expose the background that permeates interns' actions in the process of dealing with information, handling the relations that compose the social structure on the primary conception about objects that create narratives, the importance of considering previous conceptions that are monumentalized in the perception of a factual past, and the treatment of memory in history. First of all, the paradigms of the museological institution. The museum, as a public institution, is a space for disseminated and shared experiences, because its collection is composed by the very same society that composes it. Nearly all objects that the institution safeguards were donated by the population that partook on the growing and the formation of that historical experience of Londrina. Londrina, as I have said in the video, is a quite recent city. I always think it's a little bit funny when I speak to people that are from Europe or other countries that have not passed through a colonial experience, because if you look at Londrina, it's from 1929. The city doesn't even have 100 years of age. So if you take, for example, some cities in the United Kingdom, they have like thousands, maybe more than thousands of years. So since their foundation, everything beat literal or more mythological, but either way, they have a much longer experience upon that. So I always think it must be a little awkward to hear like a city that's from 1929, which is the case here. I mean, Londrina has pioneers, people that lived in those first years of the city before it was founded. that they are alive up until today. We still conduct a lot of oral history with them, like making interviews and everything, and it always works really well. So, therefore, one of the goals that the museum aims to achieve is to represent that society which it builds itself upon. How can this thus be achieved? The services that the museum provides can be divided in three different paradigms: the research, the safeguard, and the educational practice. The first part, the research. One of the aspects that take place in the daily routines and work of Londrina's Historical Museum is the acquisition of information that is prepared for use on research that deals with historical subjects. Journalists, historians, social scientists, professionals of design, information sciences, and arts, along with general researchers from basic education to postgraduate levels, can all be benefited by the methodological and theoretical preparation that ground the collection. That happens so because all information that is received by the museum that is not critically appraised can be harmful when easily shared, in contrast with the successful sharing of different points of view from a common historical experience. As Michael Pollack explains it when dialoguing with Maurice Halbwachs's Social Memory, it is no longer about dealing with social facts as things, but rather analyzing how do social facts become things, how and by who are they solidified and given stability and duration. I say that the information easily shareable from the institution in a acritical standpoint can be harmful because in this manner a bearing of pluralized identities in common with society can be strengthened and a privilege be given to narrative forms that are composed from traditional structures of a generical history that observes from the starting point the foundation of idealized values upon which a closed and singularized future is projected. From a historical theory that starts with a priori foundations composed in a narrative, the dealings with history begin with a meta-theorization of that historical experience in society, in order to expose different conceptions that exist for a pluralization of narratives of the past, while a realized fact. As an institution whose object is the past, reflection is an important starting point for each and any substantiation by the museum because its space symbolizes a monumentalization of a history from which new narratives that make up arguments and decision-making processes in contemporaneous daily life are constructed, projecting in the future expectations of the present. The museum must start from a meta-theoretical principle with the purpose of exposing the mythological frameworks that compose a traditional narrative of history, not to bury it in the graveyard of memory, but to duly present its evidence into perception, just as a shadow that, from the glare of a common sun, hits all physical matter likewise. So this is the process of research in the museum. We have the donors or the institutions that provide the information that is acquired. And here in the institution, we, the collaborators of the museum, we contextualize and relate and we study that information in a theoretical approach that puts importance and the necessity of adding a meta-theorization, an approximation of it, starting from the critical approximation of that information that is acquired from the donors. So there is a multitude of different theoretical approximations towards that in order to do what? To present and disseminate the primary sources of historical studies to the researchers. The second paradigm, safeguard. There is no history without sources, upon which we construct narratives and thus representations of the past. From most remote times, representations of the past through means of a narrative, be it mythological, artistical, or historiographical, begins from the structures that compose the contemporaneous world. From Herodotus we have built a representation of historical meanings from elements of his narratives, an ethnographical understanding of the people that he investigated, the networks of connections between city-states, and other aspects. From the paintings of Victor Meirelles, we catch a glimpse of the form through which the spirit of Brazilian Romanticism artists is portrayed. The multiplicity of kinds of sources that contribute to the study of the past depends upon the applied methodology and the purpose of those that conduct the research. In order for the past to be represented, a work of preservation of the structures by which narratives are constructed is necessary. Not by chance, places with elevated temperature and low relative humidity in the air better preserve fossils and general structures such as architectural sets and manuscript texts. This works as such because meteorological conditions influence the maintenance of material objects. In a safeguard institution, as the museum is, the infrastructure is thought in a way to complement its two other paradigms, offering preservation for the objects and allowing its use. In this way, the reception of objects that are brought and donated by people of the social community and preserving the composition of that object, that is the vessel of information that are integrated into the collection, is part of a social function of the museum. For this to occur, there is a prime importance in receiving the previously established information from those that donate them, where the meaning and relations with historical time are narrated from the point of view of who is represented in the objects, also adding it to the corpus of the institution with a whole process of cleaning that allows for a longer time period for its conservation. An important part of the principle for representing the past, thus, lies in the practical actions taken on the receiving of the objects to the institution. If there exists no history without sources, it is a social duty of the museum to guarantee the preservation of the vessels of information for the study of the past for the longest time possible, as much as it is able to. Thanks to technology, museums have been able to expand the possibilities of maintenance of their collection by the means of digital preservation. Yet, the object still maintains an important relation to the matrix, which is the vehicle of its pictorial representation, in which, in the case of photography, is the negative film, or the photography itself when the original film is no longer available. It is very important to understand from a single verb the process of safeguarding in a museological sphere, to preserve. The treatment of objects in the institution aims to guarantee the permanence of the object's shape and content as it is incorporated in the theoretical background previously presented, with the objective of making it available to the consulting public. For this to take place, the museum does not offer change to the object while meaning to restore its material conditions, since this is a far too risky process to be conducted on photography and tends to alter the characteristics that are represented in the original matrix. Thus, in the museological institution, the object is preserved in the manner in which it is acquired, limiting as much as possible the inevitable deterioration with that which the infrastructure and its curators can perform upon it. So the process of safeguard is basically this. It has the maintenance of primary sources, as in having a responsibility to the manner and the form to which the objects were received at the museum. It has a twofold means of preservation, that is the analogical, where we have to clean up, we have to prepare an infrastructure in order to maintain the object safe from meteorological conditions and everything. And it also has a digital preservation, which tends to make longer the two-dimensional aspect of it, the physical object, the process in which it is revealed from the negative film. And for example, the annotations that exist in this primary source aren't represented in digital format. They are represented and maintained through analogical means. And as I have said, this difference between the two verbs, to preserve and to restore. To restore a photograph, is a risky process which we do not conduct because of this limitation upon altering the physical and narrative properties of this object, which is also different in itself through these two paradigms, which are the matrix and the reproduction. The third paradigm right now is the educational practice or the dissemination. As in what manners does this whole social function of the museum happen in effect? The third paradigm is defined by this. The practice of propagating the institution's accumulated knowledge to the visiting public and the community as a whole. For such, the museum offers a vast exhibition related to the experiences of the city's history. From the 2000s and onwards, the institution houses a long-term exhibition that guides visitors through the history of the city from its beginnings. In this feature, scholarly visits are commonplace, where they aim to complement the contents that are taught in class, allowing a sensory realization and assimilation of those contents through visual and analogical form. Beside the common scholarly visits, tourists, academic, technical, and higher education students, governmental authorities that also visit the city on routine and events or confraternization of all kinds of participants, they also visit this exhibition. From the first room onwards, the visitor has access to narratives of the indigenous peoples, the coming of the first representatives of the CTNP, which is land company north of Paraná in Brazilian signs, and the rudimentary forms of economical movement and propaganda that aim to attract immigrants from all over the world. Also, visitors are presented to the various forms of cultural and social expression of those inhabitants that lived through its initial growing phase, like, for example, leisure activities, religious and cultural expressions, up until the apex of the exhibition, which is the narrative surrounding economic growth through coffee commerce, in the city that was already categorized as the world capital of coffee. This is a place that makes it important to mediate information, given that the exhibition lacks a more multiple historical narrative, associating itself with a more traditional remembrance of the past development of the city. The absences, more than the presences, are easily detectable to the critical, sensitized eye. The multiplicity of present identities is limited visually to that which most part of the donated collection represents, the foundational myth of the city. These factors are related, though, to the museum's recent efforts towards managing to include a bigger representational frame in its narrative. Through public projects, such as 2019's inclusion of local indigenous identity, which, through association with the local Kangan tribe, gives right to their own vocalization of the history of the region. This makes evident the institution's contemporaneous attitude that promotes a reflection of the absences in order to expand the roster of content that offers to the society that it bases itself upon, by means of working from absence towards a reflection on the foundations of historical narrative as something dynamic and source-based, but formed through historical consciousness. From absences, it is proposed to construct an awareness of critical consciousness towards discourse and construction of official narratives in order to mirror this characteristic of an active being of the citizen facing the grand experience of living in society. Beside the long-term exhibition, the institution also offers short-term exhibitions that generally last from 1 to 3 months on average. This allows for a varied kind of artists to expose and proliferate their works and discourses to a broad audience. Many events of regional reach, starting from the academia or different spheres of thought, creation, and sharing, are also enabled to take part in the institutional space of the museum, where they can reach a large slice of society, allowing the sharing of experiences and pluralized thought patterns. So these basically are the manners through which this theoretical approximation happens as a fact, as a realized fact in the institution through projects such as the one that we interns are a part of, by including narratives from the families that lived here on the start of the city and everything, collaborations from different institutions with this one, with the Historical Museum of Londrina, public communication such as the speech that you will hear tomorrow with Marina, long-term exhibition, which is the one that I presented to you in the video, and the short-term exhibition. Unfortunately, the short-term exhibition has been closed for a long time. I mean, the museum is closed, but we have not had a new short-term exhibition. Normally, they usually update really quickly. They have many important projects that are conducted there, but because of the pandemics, that has not been happening for quite a while now. So, now I talk about the museum's social space and function. In its vast array of pluralized offerings to society, the museum allows for an extension of the university as a whole, which transits the theoretical teachings common to the academic subjects when it arouses the practice of historical mediation when facing the plurality of problems that come from the contact between the dialectic of traditional and official history, which is blended in the common and self-reflexive conceptions that are part of the city during its growth, a product of propaganda and institutions that hold their own private interests, and the critique of historical meta-theoretization that instigates, through theorization and reflection of its own theorization and construction of history from narratives, to think the presences of ideological conceptions that are inescapable to the representations of facts from the past. As in a painting, the presence of framing transforms the meaning of an object. From an object in construction, premeditated, configured, risked, and tested, to a ready object, which is finalized and exposed. In what manner does one approach the hermeneutical play between two characters, painter and spectator? The comprehension of the object in observation as a product from steps that are taken in order to configure a profusion of feelings, reflections, and deconstructions to the observer is important, where a framing amounts to an expository purpose to the artist's creation. As in The Girl with the Balloon, painted by the anonymous English artist Banksy, that was shredded by the very mechanism of its framing, one must pay attention to the presence of a priori factors on the compositions of self-perceptions of exposed narratives. From this work of reflection and pondering, the social function of the public museum emerges, allowing for the exercise of a critical and sensitive gaze towards the relationship between narrative, history, and past. All of this to realize and dialogue with the presence of a constant frame that rounds all narratives about the past from the same origin that, innumerable years ago, constitutes the corpus of the worldview of myth. Referencing Meyer Shapiro, Frank Ankersmith associates the historian's conception of art to the phenomenon of presence in history when dealing with the framing as an artifice that declares the entrance of an alternative reality while observing the painting, despite the continuum between the two entities, painting and framing. And here I quote Ankersmith: "The semantic function of the picture frame is firmly to set apart the two-dimensional world of the painting from the three-dimensional world of its observers, In this way, the picture frame co-determines how we interpret what we see in the painting and hence what the painting's meaning is. The institutions reach by the promotion and distribution of supplement for research, the maintenance of the same supplement for posterity as a guardian of memories that are evoked, and the insertion of the museum in daily dealings through direct contact with the public that composes the society that forms it, taking advantage of its infrastructural and irradiating potential as presented in society, in order to expose the possibilities in handling memory and narratives as constructors of pasts whose representations are feasible. It is fundamental to conceive the presence of history as a social phenomenon that embraces all of those that belong to a common community. The suffering of the passing of time, of continuous aging, is a natural phenomenon whose action everybody is subjected to. The manner in which one experiences, measures, and relates to time and its continuous structures is a social aspect, built upon the foundation of a historical image and a historical consciousness from every subject that suffers the experiences of historical time. This search through history for inquiries about the present represents an insatiable anxiety to meaning for life. As concisely and objectively pointed by Jürgen Huysen, and here I quote, narration is a process of poiesis, of making or producing a fabric of temporal experience woven according to the need to orient oneself in the course of time. The product of this process of narration, the fabric capable of so orienting, is a history. With respect to the threat of death, narration transcends the limits of mortality into a broader horizon of meaningful temporal occurrences. This is one of the essential truths of the tales of 1001 Nights. Scheherazade knows that to narrate is to overcome death. Narration is an act of immortalization of human life. Here are the references that I have directly cited in the preparation of the text. I have many others that I don't use directly, but that have influenced me. I can all pass it all for all of you later on if you are interested or something like that. I hope it has been clear enough that you could follow up with me. I know it's a little bit dense to be putting slides that don't have more interactive means, but it's a really theoretical approximation, so that's what's in store for today. And I hope that the main point of this has been put across. Thinking the museum as a place that is subjected to ideological and historically experienced ways of thinking and being and structures that are passed forward through the passing of time and everything, how they are subjected to this. And as much as the long-term exhibition, for example, that does not have a better kind of representation of identities in it, how can we work upon that in order to make up for those losses? So, for example, how do we utilize the absences through them to create presences? For example, the long-term exhibition has had only recently the inclusion of a narrative of the indigenous people that was made by them. Until a few years ago, it was all a white construction of representation of the indigenous people, as in from immigrants that came from 1929 and onwards, and their sons and their grandsons, they constructed the history of the indigenous people. But now the museum has had the opportunity to present a more contemporaneous, more historically contemporaneous representation of the indigenous identity. But it still lacks a lot of presence. It still lacks a lot. It still has a lot of absence. And that is how I propose that we deal with this when we are dealing with the presence of the institution as a part of solidified narratives. We work upon the absences in order to reflect upon the museum as a place of solidified narratives in order to project that to outside of the museum, to the whole society, and sensitizing, making sensitized the critical look upon those world phenomena. So I hope everybody has enjoyed my presentation. That's what I have had in store for all of you. Those are my conclusions and reflections that I have proposed. And now I would like to, I am open to discussions, thoughts, other experiences, questions, perhaps. My time now is yours. I hope everyone has enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, we have one hand raised. Yeah, Ellen, please go ahead.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. I'm sure I speak for a number of us when I say I'd be really interested to have the longer list of references as well. I was hoping I could get you maybe to elaborate a bit when you talk about reframing the narrative and including Indigenous voices. And could you talk a bit about any struggles you've had regarding that? Because it can often be quite difficult to communicate a very complex topic in history to the general public. How have you found that?
Oh yes, definitely. Some of that problem is institutional, as in the historical legacy of the institution that carries with it. For example, the museum works itself upon donations. There is only one collection here that was bought from a photographer from the start of the city, but everything else has been donated. So first of all, there is an absence of donations from indigenous peoples. So there is not too much material to be worked upon to represent this. This is something that has been changed really recently. And also there is the fact that they have been pushed from the growing of the city. So for example, traditional historical narratives of the city have put Londrina as a place that didn't have anything before the construction of the city. Although, how does this contradict itself? First of all, the indigenous people, they live in the region nowadays. So where did they come from? They have kept being here. Also, for example, on the journals of the people that came to build the city and everything, they relate that they used the indigenous people in order to navigate better in the region and everything. And also the fact that there is archaeological findings that see the indigenous people as living here from times before the colonization. So at least like more than 500 years ago. So their presence here is centuries old. But I believe that one of the more common problems through this is the difficulty to have relations with the indigenous people. For example, one of the tribes, there are three main tribes here, the Xetá, the Guarani, and the Kaingang. The Xetá have a really small percentage of people that are still alive and still have cultural relation to the tribe in itself. There are less than 20 people alive right now that are of this ethnicity. So it's a little bit hard to make up this narrative about them when you don't have a more solidified relation to their history and everything. One tribe that has been a more easy to relate themselves in, as a matter of fact, the Kaingang tribe has already had an intern here at the museum. He was an indigenous boy from the tribe, and he was an intern here, and he also helped to execute the new exhibition. And the Guarani as well. Guarani, they are a little bit not on this region itself, but on the region of north of Paraná. So it doesn't have too much of a communication with the museum. But it was all like I wasn't part of the project that elaborated it, but I know that these are some of the problems that occurred. Mainly those, the traditional narratives that are like engraved in the history of the city. It's not too easy to find books that relate the history of the city that have this inclusion, that have this rereading of the presence of the indigenous people, and also this problem with communication, and also the problem in order to have like a public budget to create the new exhibitions. That is something that is not too easy to be made.
Eu gostaria que você falasse para ela que a inserção da memória indígena começou quando quando aconteceu o workshop e outros eventos, né, com a presença dos indígenas aqui, e que eles questionaram, eles ficaram muito bravos quando eles viram, você já falou isso?
Vou falar.
Tá, quando eles viram, então, assim, que hoje os indígenas estão mais presentes, tanto que tem esse estagiário, que você já falou, esse projeto, e que durante um tempo eles estavam presentes fisicamente aqui nos eventos que aconteciam, workshop e outros.
Edméia has reminded me that the whole process of inclusion of the indigenous people happened from a starting point that came from them, because there were frequent like workshops that they presented here in order to talk about their narratives and everything. And this foundational myth, which excluded the natives from the representation of the past, was included in the first room of the long-term exhibition. So, and they saw that, and they asked to like intervene to make up for the absence. So they started collaborating a lot more and providing workshops and coming to events on the museum in order to integrate this identity that was not being framed the correct way it was supposed to.
Eles colocaram
it was quite a little bit dramatic, as a matter of fact, because the entrance to the long-term exhibition had a wide panel that said in a certain phrase, I will quote from memory, like, when the colonizers arrived here, there was a empty demographical status on the land. Like, as in, there was nobody here. And they decided to put a black piece of fabric on top of it, and they wrote in their own language, in Kaingang and in Portuguese, something like, we are here, we are part of history, and we will always be part of the history. So that initiated this whole process of recontextualizing the starting of the long-term exhibition. It still has a lot to be done and, in the future and everything, but I think it's really nice right now because it has parts of this indigenous narrative in many other rooms as well. I don't know if it was possible to be seen in the video, but there were some cocares, which are the crowns that they use, and some clothings and everything. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is absolutely fascinating. Any more questions? While we are waiting for some questions to rise, I would like to insert my own question. I really like you, Guilherme, saying somewhere at the beginning of your talk that the exhibition of the museum is composed of people rather than objects, of the society itself that is kind of behind those objects. And hence, again, kind of like, it is fascinating to learn that actually that society is often very proactive and kind of reaching for you rather than the other way around. But I still assume that those objects, those donations don't just pour one way I would assume that you would have to do also field work to actually, to contextualize those objects. So could you kind of expand a little bit on this, kind of on your experience of doing field work? What is exciting about doing field work and how does it work?
Yeah, sure. Field work mostly, for example, when we acquire the information, as I have put in the presentation, it's literally like a talking with the person that donates the object. Most of the times, this field work isn't too much elaborated, and it's we have to travel or go to the home of the person, everything. Normally, when they donate the collections, they speak with us, right, at the museum. And that's how we compose this previous a priori information about the objects. But also, for example, we have excellent I forgot the word, people, collaborators here in the museum that help us to contextualize, people that have worked here for 30 years, so they know the history and everyone in the city at the back of their hands and everything. So they also help us a lot. There are some books as well that tell the history of the city, that contextualize it with political subjects and the political events that happened. There's also a tremendous effort towards oral history, as in interviewing people that lived upon those years and everything. There is an enormous collection here of tapes and CDs and digitized interviews that are stored here in the museum. So that's basically the whole process that integrates itself in order to contextualize. I would say that for me personally, the most interesting way that I see in order to contextualize all of this is talking about it. For example, when we present people to the museum, as in people that come from other parts of the world, people that come from the city itself and everything, we always build these relations through a historiographical approximation. So I'd like to think that also the presentations, they make up a lot of effort in order to contextualize all of this in our own thoughts, in order for us to build links that at first wouldn't be so clearly approachable. Besides that, there are many publishings that museum offers through projects, collaborations, and everything that involve a whole study of people that are involved in the project in order to gather up information and everything. Projects that make publications about the collection of the museum. So there's this whole process that is not simply defined. It's really sort of a multi-dimensional experience, I would say. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Any more questions, perhaps from the participants? Again, while some questions might be brewing up, let me ask another question. Again, drawing on what you said in your slides. One of your points was that you as museum workers, as curators, you have that agency in contextualizing the objects, the historical objects. And I'm always curious because we often kind of place an emphasis on the historicity of objects and the objectivity of those objects, although you made it very clear that we are kind of creating that meaning of those objects. But then I'm kind of curious again, kind of purely in your context of how you work as a team. Do you often reflect on your own agency, as we all come with our own beliefs and ideas about those objects, right? And kind of we're always kind of on this path of discovery, and there is always something new that you can discover about the same object, right? So kind of my question is, how do you reflect, and whether you do reflect as a team, on how you inscribed your own beliefs and attitudes and knowledge, but also the absence of knowledge, onto those narratives?
I would say that yes, we reflect upon that. That is the whole meaning toward the meta theorization. It's like separating theorization as in thinking it as a process of thought that creates thought and creates meaning and everything. That is a meta theoretical approximation in my point of view. So I would like to say that the first part of everything of this is realizing history on the museum as a constructed through processes object. So the first part of it is being just simply humble enough to admit that it is not a perfect history. It is a history in construction, in constant remodelization and everything. I think that this is one of the starting points, because think about how do we apply this inescapable a priori thought. I would say that I have just gone into a blank moment right now. Sorry. Just a second. Well, either way, just think about history here as a representational kind of thing. I was going to say something that was going to respond to you, but I just went to a blank state right now. Sorry about that. Either way, I believe that it's mostly about sharing. It's not about contextualizing this history or that history, but much more about sharing a common view that is constructed in a common sense. As Edméia has put to me, there is no unique narrative. It is as much as a place that presents as it safeguards memories and histories. So this pluralization is important in order to be able to present this active part of the museum. Because when we think about this, we must see the museum as something that is also active, not, it doesn't have a solidified kind of view of the world, but rather as a process of thought and exposition and reflection. And I think that's more or less the way it goes.
Thank you. Perhaps the audience would like to ask, because I don't want to take up all that time, so perhaps the audience would want to ask their own questions.
Could I ask, would you be able to accept questions via the chat, just in case people don't want to be recorded? Or...
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We forgot to mention something, the obvious, that yes, kind of if people want to write their questions instead of ask them directly, yes, please do use the chat. I have also kind of, in the meantime, kind of a technical question. Since you mentioned also kind of that both preservation and restoration kind of are important in your work, like what would be the ratio of preservation and restoration in your context?
The range of preservation?
I mean, the ratio. I mean, is your work mostly revolving around preservation or restoration, or these two activities are given equal importance?
The way I see it, the museum only conducts preservational processes. We have been trained by a curator, a restorator. She's an arts restorator woman, and she made this really nice workshop for us in which we learned through this whole process of maintaining objects as a means to preserve their content. So restoration, we see that as something that makes different the starting point of creation of information and narratives. So that's not a process that occurs within the museum. As long as we are thinking from restoration from a point of view that alters something, but if we think of restoration as one of the processes of preservation, for example, making a new digitized copy of the image, or making a new copy from the matrix, that is the negative film, then yes, there is this whole processes. But as I have put, there is a primary importance of maintaining the matrix supports the matrix startings of that object. For example, when a negative film is donated, that is the matrix. The image comes from it. But if we also have a photograph that has been revealed by the author, by the donor, that has, for example, inscriptions by pen on the back side of the photograph, that is also in a sort of matrix, because it conveys that information directly from the source of it. It's not a object that was made at the museum, like a new copy and everything. I think we will show you that on the third day, the different kinds of like hierarchical sorts of photographies and everything.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Edméia wants me to also relate this. There is a problem that we lack the resources in order to conduct every single processes of restoration that are available to photographs. Because of this, only some objects go through this restoration process. And I'm talking most about photographs, but that makes sense because also the train has been restored to its original qualities. I have showed you in the video, it had been terribly almost destroyed by rust and termites and everything. And there has been a long process of restoring the whole part of that was made of iron and other materials and wood as well from termites. And that has worked tremendously well because it's as much as it is also a source of information, the train is something that you can alter its conditions without, for example, damaging the fine sheet of emotion from the photograph, for example. That doesn't happen in a train. So since it was all eaten up by rust, the process was actually bringing back to life that sort of that. That's a little bit different with photography and negative films because of this kind of layers of emotion that if you alter them in the wrong ways, you can alter the properties of that and the image that it conveys and everything. There's quite a different in relation to it. And restoration processes such as the trains, there are always from money that comes, budgets that come from partnerships and collaborations. So that's not something that happens all the time. That's not always possible. But conservational efforts can be done.
Yeah, hi, I see one more hand raised. Xiaoxin, could you go ahead, please?
Yeah, I want to ask a question. And thanks for your wonderful presentation. And I want to ask that you gave me a sense that there are many objects and narratives in this museum are conveying and constructed by the collective memory of the indigenous people. I'm wondering which aspects of context are being selected in priority to be shown in the museum, and especially in the long-term exhibition, because you mentioned that many students come here to see the long-term exhibition, something like that. And I want to ask how you decide to make these kind of chosen, something like that. Yeah.
There was a little instability in my connection. I just want to know. One moment. I think they have understood what you said better than me. So basically, you were asking kind of about the hierarchical approximation of those objects of the indigenous people in the exhibition. Is that it? Something like that? How do we choose to present and everything?
Yeah, kind of.
Oh, yes. So, as Edméia has just told me, those very indigenous people, they came here in order to help on the construction of this new exhibition. So it was a process of integration, as in the museum seeing the steps that the exhibition takes, thinking about how do they relate to this historical development that occurs on the exhibition. And on the other side, there are the indigenous people that are presenting also references from their way of seeing the exhibition, also thinking about how can this be integrated in this part. One of the theoretical approximations that I like to use when thinking this is from Ulpiano Menezes. He was the director of the National Museum of History that is from São Paulo, and he talks about overcoming a teleological reading of museum exhibitions, and he talks about like this. He talks about overcoming as well different identities as being segregated one from another. So he talks about this sort of island form of composing narratives in the museum. So I also like to think about this. The islands that speak, for example, about the housing conditions that were in those times, they are integrated not only with, for example, the culture of the pioneer, but they also have material culture of the indigenous people on that same island. So in the third room, when we have the set of islands that tells the history of religion, for example, there is a priest's robe that is a Christian identity, and beside it there is a I forgot the word, a representation. Anyway, there is a representation of a religious indigenous house. That's the thing. So it's all integrated into the same island of common subject, of a common subject. And there's also a collection of indigenous photographs that was donated by an anthropologist that worked with them in the whole professional life of. So there's also this whole sort of interaction that occurs that determines when it's going to be, where it's going to be exhibited, and how. I don't think I think you could see in the video the inner part of the exhibition on the first room. On the ceiling, there is a constellation that the Kaingang tribe sees, the world view and everything. And that was proposed by them. So there's all this integration of thoughts to purposes being applied in the exhibition. It's a whole integration process.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There was another hand coming up, and then
hi.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Nina. Thank you for your presentation. Xiaoting asked a question about the choosing of the long-term exhibition. I want to know something about the short-term exhibition. Like, what's the place of the short-term exhibition? Where it's placed? Is it on the first floor, I saw it's the long term is on the left hand, so the small room on the right is the short term exhibition place. Is that right? Okay, so
Yes.
how do you choose the short term exhibitions objects? Like what kind of objects will you choose? Are they also photos, or how will they connect to the long term exhibits? Yeah.
I think that's awesome. That's something that I don't think I have enough time to present to you, because we don't have a short-term exhibition for some time now, since the beginning of the pandemics. There had been a short-term exhibition that had just opened and it had to close. It was really unfortunate, but those are not collections. Most of the time, not collections that exhibitions that are prepared by the museum. They are prepared through collaboration with projects, with people that come here and offer a short-term exhibition, and then we schedule it, and it's mostly on the responsibility of the person that proposes the short-term exhibition. I will give a few examples. There is a cultural institution in Brazil, which is called Funarte, and they have prepared a presentation here in the museum. It's a presentation that goes around all of Brazil, and it came to the Historical Museum of Londrina to present the life, memory, and works of a very important Brazilian poet. That his name is Paulo Leminski. He's an important figure to the constructivist movement of poetry in Brazil. So it was a beautiful exposition. It was made by this whole institution. They brought their own handyman and everything to mount the exposition and everything. But also, for example, there was a presentation that was prepared by a professor from the university that presented her historiographical studies object, which was Saint Francis, the saint of the Catholic Church. She studied saints and everything. So she had an exhibition that on the first room had, for example, history of Saint Francis. On the second room, there were like his miracles and everything. On the third room, how is he being thought in the days of today? Like, how is the saint in the Brazilian culture represented and everything like that? And also, for example, exhibitions that talk about Londrina's photographical club, for example. They also exhibit sometimes in this space. So it's not prepared by the museum. It's prepared by people that offer those collaborations and exhibitions. Edméia has just shared a really nice experience here. For example, there was one exhibition that was prepared by the Department of Design Studies, Fashion Design Studies, and they prepared an exhibition that talked about white shirts and how do they change according to the historical format of clothing and everything, and proposed how will they continue in the years to come. So that's something that has been prepared by them and presented in the museum. So that's also a part of the social function of the museum, too, being able to present these narratives that are composed from pluralized identities. There are not so many of those that are prepared by the museum itself, because it's a quite arduous work. You require a lot of time, a lot of collaborators. That's something the museum lacks a little bit because of budget problems and everything, situations, and also it requires a lot of research. So in order for the museum to work there, it would need to have a bigger chance at being able to prepare all of this through these whole processes and everything. But that's basically it. I hope you have understood.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have another question. Can I ask another one?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. You've talked about the train before. I want to ask about the label. Will you label it with the train is maybe destroyed at what time and that's being conservation and by what method and what's the process? Will it be on the label so the audience can know that?
The labels. I don't think I understood what you said. Can you repeat it for me, please?
Yeah, because the museum will do lots of conservation works. So will the conservation works be appeared on the labels, so the audience will know its original be like maybe destroyed or maybe damaged, but after conservation it will be as well it represents as this way. So well the audience knows actually, I want to know, like, because you maybe do a reproduction, so it's not maybe not always be the original thing. If it's a, I don't want to say the fake of a replica, well, to be well, audience will know it's not the original one.
In this case, the reproduction is much more common. Is that only occurs with photographs. When they are exhibited in the museum and the exhibition, they are copies because they are like plastered in long panels and everything. They are not the original pictures because those are accommodated, safeguarded in the collections room, which has controlled climatization and humidity, relative humidity in the air. So the objects themselves as well, they are not like replicas. They have gone through process of cleaning and maintenance that is daily necessary, like cleaning it up and everything. That happens, but those are not replicas. On the contrary, the train that has gone through a very thorough restoration, it has a panel on the side, on the boarding platform. There's the train, and is a wall here that goes along with it. There is a panel in one of those walls that talks about the restoration processes. It has a sheet of metal that represents how the train was before the restoration and everything. So it also comments upon that. But on the long-term exhibitions, there's no need for that because those objects are the real kind and everything. But for example, there is a reenactment of like an office room, for example, that is there in the exhibition. I don't think you even need to say that that is a reenactment because it's quite clear that it's not the actual thing and everything. But beside that, there's no need for that in the long-term exhibitions. Only, I mean, knowing that the object has been safeguarded, as in it has been cleaned went through a cleaning process and everything, that's something that happens, and I don't think there's even the need to mention that because it's a part of the daily experiences and everything. But that also implies in selecting the objects that go to the exhibition. For example, if we have two photographical cameras and one of them is badly damaged and the other one is in okay conditions, we use the okay conditions. The badly damaged must be kept in order to be preserved and everything. So it has that logic as well, but it's all, nothing is a replica in itself.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, there's one more hand, Shushin. Could you go ahead, please?
I have one question because I noticed the restore of the railway train ticket office in the museum, and I find it is in the central of the hall and just in the front of the entrance of the museum. So I wonder why put this giant object in this place. Is there any reason in terms of the narrative of the whole museum layout? I don't know if I expressed clearly.
Yeah, sure, I understood it. So that little, I forgot the name. Sobre a bilheteria. Se ela tem algum tipo de uso, né? De uso, assim, então.
Não, ela é um espaço expositivo e a gente deixa todas as mochilas das crianças lá dentro.
So it's more of a exhibitional place in the museum as well. It doesn't have too much like a news, as in, for example, someone visits the museum has to pass there. No, that's not it. It is an exhibition. It's part of the exhibition, because we must think of the exhibition of the museum as not only comprised of long and short term. The whole process, the whole museum is an exhibition in itself. It is a process of communicating about the past. But we do use that room for when we receive children from the schools and everything. We store their handbags there, so they don't have to carry it around the exhibition and everything. So it has a purpose for that as well. In common times, outside of the pandemics and everything, there isn't like almost absurd quantity of children that visit the museum. We already have had like 600 people visiting at the same time the institution. And the museum is big, but it's not as big as, say, for example, European museums, such as we must have in the United Kingdom and everything. So you gotta imagine like 600 children in this museum really crammed everything down. So, especially when those visits are made in collaboration with the local Secretary of Communications and Culture, because they tend to bring a lot of children from the rural areas, and they have never seen the museum, so they are always really like instigated, really happy to be there, and they want to scream it out. So that's a mostly space for starting things and just being able to see that experience of reenactment of a railway station and everything.
Yeah, I see. Thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I'm aware of the time limitations. We just, ran out of our time. Under other circumstances, I would suggest us lingering a little bit longer, but since we're meeting again tomorrow, I'm sure that there will be more questions and there will be more opportunities to ask those questions. So I would say I would call it a day today. It was quite intensive and in kind of full of kind of new experiences and stories. So I would love us to kind of like sleep on this knowledge that you've kind of brought, you brought up today, and then meet tomorrow with a new energy and new questions. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for participating. Thanks Guilherme for your beautiful presentations. Thanks everyone for being in the background and supporting Guilherme. And I understand that you will create the Teams link this time and you will share that link with us. So just to warn all the participants that email will come later today. However, the time of the meeting tomorrow will be the same from 2 to 4 p.m. UK time, which is important to stress as we're all on different time zones.
Yes, I would like to thank everyone that is participating. It has been an awesome experience. I hope that there will always be more to be said and everything, but I hope that I have been clearly, exposed my thoughts on this. And even though today and the day after tomorrow, I won't be the main tutor, I will be here also to talk about everything. If you have more questions, if the things that I said today complement the things that we will see tomorrow and the day after, I will be happy to intervene in all of this as well. My colleagues, we will all integrate in this communication without a single problem for that. So thanks everyone as well.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.